Hello and welcome to Meet the Problem Solvers. I'm Judy Perlman and I'm looking forward to a really interesting and slightly different kind of conversation. Tonight my guest is Kameel Nasr. Kameel is an avid cyclist, a world traveler. I know he's a builder and a construction guy. He's an author, he's an opera lover, he's a kind of an all-around guy. And one of the things that he does is he has his own interview show here at CCTV. So we wanted to sit down, and this is sort of a 6-month marker for me with this show, and it was an interesting opportunity to sit down and talk with a friend who's also an interviewer, kind of dig into the whole thing.
Well, thank you so much for being on this wonderful show. And we actually started together. When I started a couple of years ago, I started and I wanted to make an author show to interview other authors, and we were the first show, you and I. So this is going back a ways.
Yeah.
You interviewed me, in fact.
That's right. That's right. I interviewed you. I knew I had very intense questions, and I was a little nervous. After you do this for a while, you get a lot more
right.
loosey,
You get a little
looser.
relaxed on it. Right. Yeah. Make
That's
mistakes.
right.
It's okay.
You make a mistake. You know what? It's kind of like, oh my gosh, live camera.
Yeah.
It's a mistake. Oh well.
So we're going to go back and forth on this. We talked a little about why we do the show, right?
Yeah. Why don't you tell us?
Do you
here?
want me
why don't
to
you
start
go first? Tell us about why your show and why you do it.
You know, I came here to CCTV and found that we could do TV shows, and I thought, well, this opened up a whole new possibility for me. You could do something. You could express yourself, and you could do something for the community as well. And I think that's an important aspect to me, is to give to the community, to where I am. And I think it started, me personally, when I was a kid. I went down to the San Francisco Boys Club, now it's called the Boys and Girls Club, and there were volunteers there who just came to help people out. I mean, they didn't know me from, I was just a little kid, but, you know, I learned to swim, I learned to play different kind of ball, went to summer camp. It was just a wonderful experience. And I found when I came here that I can give to the community. And I thought, well, I'm an author, and I know a lot of authors. Why not interview these authors? And that's what I started doing. I started interviewing my friends, and then it became more. I've now got about 100 shows. I've interviewed about 100 people, plus or minus, and it's been so varied. The shows I've been talking about the Incas, about the heart, about health issues. A lot of fiction authors, but the fiction authors, like they would talk about the fishermen of our region. This was it's called New England Authors. So it was a regional issue, and talks about so many different subjects, about Siberia, about all kinds of places that we went to. So it was so interesting, and it became that.
I have the same thing of like, whatever I thought my show was going to be.
Right.
It's really diverse. It's really varied, and you bring someone on, and the conversation, even if you kind of plot it out a little bit, it can go into the most amazing places.
Yes. Yeah. What are some of the shows you've done so far?
Oh my goodness. Well, let's see. Just earlier really, I'll just count backwards, okay?
Yeah.
My last guest talked about a rare disease called neurofibromatosis. Her daughter was diagnosed with this, and she has turned into one of our national advocates around this, services and resources and research funds. Before that was a guy who was a chef by training, a Kenyan guy, who decided to go back to Kenya and teach what they call beach boys, very, very low income, impoverished young people, skills to work in kitchens. So they give them culinary skills, they give them actually a bag full of kitchen equipment, and they help them get jobs at the hotels.
Right, right.
Before that was a guy talking about being one of the leaders of the National Voter Protection Corps.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's just been an amazing. Oh, and before that, it was a local doctor talking about the opioid crisis here in Cambridge,
Right.
Somerville,
Right.
and basically new strategies that seem to be effectively bringing down opioid deaths.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. For my part on the author show, I really loved doing it. It's a lot of work. You know, I read the books before I interview the authors. So that's a book a week on top of what, and some authors have written several books. I don't necessarily read all their work. Some authors have written 20, 30 books, so I can't read all of them. But I could read them, and that's another thing that's been so interesting, is you get to know a lot of things that you never thought you never would.
Absolutely, absolutely.
The suffrage movement, dyslexic or kids with problems.
I came bombing out of here after I had a woman here talking about solar panels.
Yeah.
I was on a campaign. Everybody I talked to, I mean, you learn so much. And I think for me, that is really part of sort of the solution for me. If we talk about sort of the problem solution setup, whatever the problem is, part of the solution is I learn a lot and I become an advocate for their work and their strategy. And it's really, really very satisfying.
Yes, it is. Yeah. So and there's a lot of work to put this on YouTube, and I have a lot of stations in the area that take my show. I have about 40 stations.
Oh, I have to learn how to do that.
Yeah, they take the show and they broadcast it usually 2 or 3 times. They broadcast our show at different times, and I try to make it quality, professional, and interesting. There's been I can tell you, there's been a couple of times when I haven't read much of the book, and I tried to wing it, and it hasn't come out very well. You know, you have to be prepared. You have to do this with your heart and with all your force. Yeah.
I've had a couple of those kind of like drenching moments where things really don't go well. And mine is also about preparation. It's about really being grounded in what our topic is, what it is that we're going to get done. Because if a guest is late or a guest is grouchy, it's like all of these things kind of can jump you out of being present and centered. Yeah. And so one of the things I have figured out is I always have my crib sheet right here in front of me.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's a security blanket, but I have not made the same kind of egregious mistake since I had my paper in front of me.
There's also this freedom to do whatever you want.
Yeah.
So I've interviewed a lot of best-selling authors, really good authors, but I've also interviewed people who, say, new writers, people who are unknown. And sometimes the work of new writers is the best work, because new writers spend an enormous amount of time doing their first book. So they develop it and they edit it and re-edit it and re-edit it until it's really good. And there's some really good, talented writers, especially around this area here, that makes it very interesting to interview the people. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. When we were talking about this, one of the things you talked about was your growing interest in sort of planetary health and climate issues. And one of the things you said on this phone conversation was, how can we have an effect on issues that really matter? And that's where we came up with our title for this show, which is Video Activism. Because actually both sides of that are true. Video is a tool. It can either just be like
watching cartoons, or it can be a way to share information and lead. And the activism comes in, I think, for both of us as interviewers, as we help people pull their stories out and get their stories out.
Right, right. And for me, it's partly artistic as well. There's the authors are artists, and we want to present their art to the world. So it's an important. The authors have a hard time presenting their stories. But as you said, now I interviewed you on the show some months back, and we talked about homelessness, which was a very interesting show. I think we've got some feedback on it. It was really very interesting, and I think. Didn't you say that inspired you?
Absolutely, absolutely. So Kameel called and said, I have an opening on my show. Some guest was sick or something. Do you want to come on? And I said, well, I haven't written a book. I'm not a New England author. And he said, that's okay. What would you like to talk about? And I said, homelessness. That's what I've worked in for 30 plus years. I'll talk about homelessness. And what do you, like, what issue? And because you're so concerned about climate issues, you said, is there anything about climate change and planetary health that you could do? So I knew that something, and I did some research, and we came in and we talked about the fact that the fact is natural disasters, floods, earthquakes, people who are very low income or already homeless have the most terrible outcomes. They have the heart, they lose their housing, they can't get it back. It's impossible to replace incredibly bad quality housing. I mean, who's going to, nobody's going to pay for that.
They lose their houses because of a flood or a fire, and that's the end of it.
That's it. It can't, They oftentimes, they didn't have official ownership. It's kind of been like where their families lived forever, so they couldn't even go through a whole insurance claim. So yeah, we had a really interesting show, and I think by the end of that conversation, I was like, wow, this is really, really cool and interesting. And you said, you should do a show.
Yeah, that's right. But as you said now, recently, I love interviewing authors and talking about health and the community or the Berkshires or wherever we go in the world. But I know that we have a climate catastrophe on our hands here, and I think I want to use the activism to get the word out about the climate catastrophe and what we can do about it. Not just, oh, this is bad and this is bad, but what we can do about it. And I want to turn the show more into that, and I haven't figured it out yet. I'm still interviewing authors, but I want to turn the show into the activism for planetary health.
So can I thank you publicly and tell you what the gift that you gave me?
Oh, okay. What's that?
So at the end of that conversation, I think it was in May of 2019. And the idea was like, hey, you should have a show. You're really comfortable on camera. I was like, yes, I'm going to do a show on homelessness, because I know a lot about homelessness, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff to say about homelessness, and I can look at it from all these aspects. And in a different conversation, some other conversation, you said, and it went by very quickly, you said, there's a way that I wished I'd framed my show in a slightly less targeted way. And I was like, oh my God, I can talk about homelessness, but what if I took that filter off and I could talk about anything?
Yes.
And it became looking for problems and looking for problem solvers. And yes, I have done some stuff about housing and homelessness, but I've also done a lot of other things. And in fact, actually, let me just say, this is Meet the Problem Solvers. I'm Judy Perlman. My guest is Kameel Nasr. We are rocketing through a conversation about interviewing and video. But I wanted to tell you about one of the coolest guests I had. This was a 14-year-old climate activist, and we all know who Greta Thunberg is, right? I did not have Greta. She's 17 anyway. But after the big climate strikes back in September, a whole bunch of youthful people in Greater Boston said, we need to do this again. And there was a climate strike that was a smaller one and a more localized one, although there were several nationally in December.
Yeah.
And so the week before, my guest was a 14-year-old climate activist named Emmy Jacobson.
Wonderful.
She was so prepared, passionate, knowledgeable,
Articulate.
Yeah. And just, this is like her life.
Yes.
And not only is she passionate about climate issues, but she's passionate about becoming an organizer and an activist and a leader. And it was just so cool to have this young woman here.
We're really blessed with our younger generation.
Yeah.
You know, there was a climate march a few months ago down on the Boston, City Hall, and all the young people were there, high school students.
That may have been it.
Yeah.
All of the organizers of this December one were high school or younger.
Yeah, high school students, and they know the problem.
Yeah.
They're reading about it. They're sharing the information.
Right.
And a lot of these stodgy old people, we have to get out of the way and let them tell us what we need to do to join their movement. And actually, that's what's happening, is that a lot of children are telling their parents that this climate thing is real, and you better get action.
Right.
And so they're doing this in the home, and that's why there's such a greater consciousness about the global warming and the threat of global warming.
That's right. I mean, my kids say it too. It's sort of like, you know what? Like, you guys in your generation are not doing what needs to happen.
Right.
We have got to hit this number or not hit this number. We have got to stay under this degree of climate, what do you call it? Rising temperatures, I guess.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a real thing, and you're right, they are leading.
And so I've had a couple of people talking about the climate, authors, and from different aspects. And I think what comes across is it's a real problem. It's a real difficult problem to solve. We can tackle it. We have to start tackling it, but it's not easy. It's not easy to change the electrical system. It's not easy to change cars to electric cars. It's definitely a daunting problem, but we have to work at it.
But what I learned from Emmy that day, again, like every show, I learn super important information. What she explained was that the federal government deeply subsidizes fossil fuel extraction, but that the costs of renewables, of wind and solar, are coming down so sharply and rapidly that, like, the justification of the cost, like, we have to, it's just crazy. It's like, it's better for us as taxpayers to invest in the new technologies than it is to shore up the old ones that burn fossil fuels and increase the temperature.
So the government has special breaks for people for companies who explore for gas and petroleum, and so they get tax breaks for that. And then when they take the oil out of the wells, they claim it as a depreciation. So they claim it out on their taxes. So they end up not paying any taxes, which is a terrible subsidy. And
that we are making.
And if you think about the roads, it's all the government pays for this. Enormous amounts of money. Just salting the roads is an enormous amount of money. And maintaining the federal, state, county, city roads, that's all subsidized. That's all subsidizing the petroleum industry in a different way. And so when somebody says, we should give a little bit of money to Amtrak. So, no, private enterprise. And then, it's a different story. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about, like, where we've come and where we're going. I'm interested, and I want you to ask me this question too.
Sure.
has your show and your feeling about yourself as an interviewer and all, how did that change from the time you started until over time?
Well, so like you, I've gotten a little bit more relaxed about about things, and I edit the shows, of course. So if if somebody makes a different comment that they don't want to make, I could edit it out, and. So I feel more calm. I feel ability to ask any question and to be personal. To ask how this book you've written, how did it affect your family, your being, and so on. So and the other thing I starting to do is to be more organized, and to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, to organize the conversation so it's a better conversation. Yeah. So your turn.
Yeah.
How have you changed since the beginning? Yeah.
Well, I too would say that sort of getting organized and prepared was a big help. Early on, I think we came up with this framing for my show of like 10 minutes about what's the problem. So we're sort of the teaching piece, 10 minutes on what's the solution that the guest is working on. And that often goes in a lot of different ways, like what are other people working on in other parts of the world, or what are the barriers, or, how do you know if you're successful? Do you see actually things changing? What changes? And then the last 5 minutes, we usually talk about takeaways, sort of like, now that we've been educated and now that we know more about what can be done, what can we, as the people who just are these learners, how do we turn this into action?
Right.
So, for example, I had a really cool gerontologist on, and the title of that show was, Should You Still Be Driving? And so, first of all, she gave us a bunch of information about older drivers,
right.
And then she really gave us concrete ways to bring up that very painful conversation with an older parent or an aunt or an uncle, but also for people themselves to ask, should I still be driving?
Yeah.
I mean, that was a really interesting personal takeaway.
Yeah, I'd really love to do a show on self-driving cars.
Self-driving cars, that would be great.
So about 20 years ago, people were saying, oh, self-driving cars are going to be around in 5 or 10 years. And it encountered a lot of obstacles. And one of the obstacles is people like me, bicyclists. And bicyclists are a little bit erratic on the road, and they're difficult for other cameras and so on. But I just long for the day when we would have, you could just on your GPS, you plug in the address and sit back and let the car take you there. And take you there quickly.
I think there's another piece of it that I don't recall the conversation clearly, but there's another thing that if we had self-driving cars, we could have many fewer cars, because it's like you would take it from here to someplace, I would then take it there. So they would not be parking. They would be in motion, and there'd be fewer of them. Yeah,
so there was a study recently about Uber and Lyft, and the study showed that they use more gasoline than if people had their own cars. So that was, it was thought to be the other way around, but in fact the study showed the opposite.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So as I said, these are problems that we want to address, and we want people to know about. We want to share the knowledge, and this video production, the shows, give that opportunity.
Yeah, to explore it. It's
Right.
not like it's encyclopedic in 27 minutes.
Yeah.
So I do want to take a couple of minutes to talk about takeaways. I also just want to say, Kameel does his show in a different studio.
Yeah.
It's higher quality, has more cameras. I mean, this is really fun and great, but it's kind of been a considered choice on my part to stay in this low budget, low tech scene. I'm not quite sure why, but it does feel kind of like boots on the ground.
Yeah.
Yours is very nice.
Yeah,
It's more interesting visually.
So I have to kind of congratulate you because nobody sponsors you, or me. It's out-of-pocket expenses. You do it for
Love and purpose and right.
whatever it is, right?
All right, so in our remaining less than a minute and a half,
the takeaway.
The takeaways. What do we? So I just will want to say that our title tonight was Video Activism. Mobilizing for Planetary Health.
I
what does that
think
do
one
for us?
takeaway is that this is a very effective method of giving information out and changing public opinion.
Yeah.
I've had something like I'm coming up to like 20,000 views on YouTube.
Wow.
On the different shows. I think the climate ones, stations love to take those because people are engaged in the climate show. So I'd like to do more of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Your takeaway?
Well, to try stuff. Seriously, like this was a risk, not a huge risk, although I'll tell you, when you make a misstep on live camera, it feels like the risk is pretty high. But if you feel, I would just say, this has meant so much to me to do this for the last 6 months. And I just kind of I just got myself trained to do this. Like, take a step. If you feel like you have something to contribute to the world, take a risk. Take a step.
Yeah. Have you ever called one of your guests the wrong name?
I have not. Have you?
Yes, I have. Yes.
Oh, well, on that uplifting note, we'll probably that's kind of like the low point. It can only go up from there.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Well, this was great fun, Kameel.
Oh, Judy,
thank you.
Great.
Really
Thank
a
you.
pleasure.